Hello, my name is John Reynolds. Welcome to Extraordinary Life Stories. On this episode, I'm talking with global business leader Darren Roos. Darren is the back-to-back winner of the CEO of the Year Award. He's now the chairman of IFS, the multinational enterprise software company. With a strong background in technology and digital transformation, Darren has been instrumental in driving the growth and innovation of IFS, positioning it as a leader in enterprise software solutions. Darren is recognised for his forward-thinking approach and deep understanding of how technology can drive business success in today's fast-evolving market. I'm really looking forward to talking with Darren, so let's get into it. Darren, thank you for joining me.
Thank you, John.
I've been looking forward to this.
Me too.
Tell me, who is Darren Roos?
South African born, been in the UK now for 12 odd years. CEO up until recently of a large software business, and now chairman across 3 different software businesses, global businesses with a couple of billion in revenue and 10,000 employees. So.
And awarded back-to-back CEO of the Year Award. You weren't going to be that. I'll say that for you. I love this about you. There's for someone that has got quite so much success attributed to you in the business world, there's a real lack of ego. How have you managed that? How has that something that you've sort of chosen to manage, or did it come naturally to you?
Well, I think especially when you run a large business, as I've been privileged enough to do, it's always a massive team effort. And I think that the day that you go home and you go, this success is my success, you've got a bigger problem. So, I think for me, it's always been about attracting great people around me and making sure that I can set a tone for them. And it's, the success that we have is not my success. It is a success of a much bigger organization, and without them, it would never have happened. So, there's a term which is servant leadership, which I've never really liked. But I think it's true.
You embrace it.
Yeah.
Where did what sort of early influences for you, kind of who and what for your business and sort of life decisions? Tell me about that.
As we've discussed before, I started working quite young. My parents, were very much blue collar workers. We grew up in an environment where we didn't have a lot, and I was introduced to work really young. And I guess that was my introduction to the business world as young as 10 years old. This was in South Africa. You wouldn't have got away with this in health and safety rules in the UK. But at 10 years old in South Africa, I'd drive a tractor in the holiday resort that my parents ran, ferrying guests backwards and forwards in the day resort. And that seems crazy, but it was this little tractor with a trailer behind, and I'd be on it from 8 in the morning until 6 in the evening, driving guests around for tips.
Were you interacting with the guests as well?
Yeah, I think, as you do when you're younger, it doesn't come naturally, but it comes with time. And
that's what I mean. Like, it's a life skill developing from such a young age, right? Sure. And a discipline.
Yeah, for sure. And I think that's the key, is that you learn a bunch of discipline and a strong work ethic. And I think that was instilled in me very early. And then, I think like a lot of people that have been successful, I worked very hard and I got very lucky. And the intersection of those two things are the result.
Do you believe you make your own luck? Because luck gets talked about a lot, right? But I mean, you've got to put yourself in the right positions. You've got to have that mindset and discipline to then put yourself in a position where potentially luck comes to you.
Yeah, I think a lot of people are, not everybody, but a lot of people are presented with opportunities that they don't take because they might be too risk averse, or they're in their comfort zone and they stay in that comfort zone. And I think something that I have done frequently, from quite young, is when those opportunities are presented, I've been comfortable to get out of my comfort zone and take those opportunities. And some of them have worked and some of them haven't worked. But I think that being comfortable to take the risks is important, and that's been a factor.
So that's basically being comfortable to put yourself in an uncomfortable position. So that's something that you've embraced early, because that's... I know the saying, the comfort zone is where dreams go to die, has caught me out before. Yeah. Built a business, cookie cut, and then the world changed around me, and I had stood still. I wasn't the resilient person I needed to be to then deal with things when certain things came along that were really tricky to deal with.
I think change is something that human beings are not comfortable with. We are creatures of habit. We're very comfortable with with our comfort zone, the status quo. And you know, nothing that I did, but my parents, as I said, ran holiday resorts, and they moved a lot because the nature of that you know, job was that they would work in a resort, they would affect change. Once that a change was affected, they would move on to another resort. So you know, as a child, or as a youngster, I went to lots of different schools. You know, I think once we moved to the UK, I lived in the same house for 4 years. That was the longest I'd ever lived in one house in my entire life.
So you were really used to that.
So I was very comfortable with
making
change.
new friends.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Interesting.
And then you apply that, whether it's changing jobs, moving home, making friends, you adapt to being able to do that more easily and being more comfortable with the change. And I think it's an important skill set. Being comfortable to get out of your comfort zone and embrace change is extremely important.
And you had an early, that was given to you early through your parents' experience.
Yeah.
If someone was watching and listening to this now and really wanted to change, they knew it was the right thing for them, but they don't know how to. Is there any advice you give to someone to taking those first steps to making those changes?
I mean, I haven't thought about it much, but I think that being aware of it is probably just the first
Self-aware.
step. You know, being aware that the feeling of anxiety that is natural to feel when you're going through change, whether that is changing schools, whether that is moving home, going to a new job, any of these things are things that are going to happen many, many times. And in fact, in a modern generation, you're going to change jobs many more times than you would have if you were older. But recognizing that feeling of discomfort is normal, and try and embrace it. Recognize that discomfort is okay.
And actually, if you fast forward to right now, so you could have effectively stayed at IFS if you'd wanted to because of the success you're having now and so on.
Yeah.
But you choose to change roles.
Yeah.
Is that a deliberate, conscious thing that goes back to the fact that you don't want to be sitting comfortably and marinating in stuff that becomes normal? Are you looking to always push yourself and grow?
I think there's probably some of that. I think IFS is a slightly different situation where, you know, I'd been CEO for 6 years. I'm a big believer that, you know, CEO tenures shouldn't be much longer than that. I think that you come in with a bunch of energy and ideas, and after 6 years, I don't know that you're bringing a lot of energy and ideas anymore. And in fact, my successor, when he joined, and you know, I was part of recruiting him. He you know, he's a massive part of the success of the business now. In his first 100 days, he saw 100 customers. It was a mantra that he had. I wasn't seeing 100 customers in 100 days 6 years in. You know what I mean? So that change brings a level of energy, and yes, you're facing some slightly different changes, the continuity and so on. But there's no question that it invigorates the business. It brought new energy, and ours was a very carefully planned transition. But to answer your question, I think part of it was that I felt it was the right thing for the business. As a shareholder, that was important to me. But equally, I did want to be able to challenge myself in different ways. And you know, when I left Software AG, I'd been there for 9 years. I'd gone from being an individual contributor salesperson to running international sales, being a member of the board. And you know, I left there in an extremely comfortable position, earning a lot of money in a place where I had a ton of credibility, and went into SAP, which was a massive organization and like shark-infested waters compared to Software AG.
But a fresh challenge.
But a fresh challenge. And I wanted to prove to myself that I could do it, and had a really good time at SAP. But again, left a very comfortable position there to move to IFS to challenge myself again. So I think being comfortable with that was an important part of it.
You're probably the perfect person to ask this, but with the popularity of, say, the podcast, The Diary of a CEO,
Yes.
and the business side of life becoming a lot more, and rightly so, of interest to people in a world where celebrity could often be Love Island and so on. You know, so many people are aspirational in business now. What would you say makes a really good CEO?
So I think it's interesting because there's so much desire, I guess, on people who would answer that question to paint a very glamorous picture and to give you a very, you know, I guess a sexy answer. But it really isn't. You know, what makes a good CEO, I believe, is firstly, you have to work incredibly hard. It demands, you're not having a conversation about work-life balance often. You have to love what you do, and your job needs to be
So
everything.
passion and purpose is important, right?
100%, because you're not going to put in that work without the passion and purpose. The passion and purpose become the reason that or the way that you're able to apply yourself that consistently and work that hard. I think that building on the hard work, you have to be, I think, the most effective CEOs, and it's certainly been a way for me, has been to be very authentic. I think that some CEOs like to paint a picture of kind of perfection and talk a lot about vision and mission, but not on the how are we going to get there, rather just where are we headed. For me, I've always benefited hugely, and at IFS I think I've been particularly effective by being authentic. And I weathered COVID in my time at IFS, and that was really hard. And I think that my time with the employees and my ratings by the employees were consistently high, but that meant that sometimes I had to give a bad message or a tough message. And at the time, when COVID hit, we had thousands of employees all over the world. People were scared, people were really uncertain, and rather than tell them what I thought they wanted to hear, I was honest, and I told them what we knew, I told them what we didn't know, I told them how we were going to weather the storm, what the consequences of that would be. That meant, in some cases, pay cuts and taking people onto, not full-time work. But we weathered that storm together, and it worked really well. So I think authenticity, hard work, and then I've always been a big believer that in any leadership position, our job is to make it clear where we're going, how we're going to get there, and what's in it for the individual. Why are they doing it? And those three things have always been important to me.
Brilliant. There's clear communication, even if it's not good news. I remember, although we've had some memorable conversations building up to this and getting to know you, I actually read about how you handled COVID. And I went a stage further and started to read about the employee feedback.
Yeah.
And it was very much people first, which in business can be ruthless, it can be hard, right? But it feels to me like that was your priority, valuing people and trying to make sure you did the right thing by people.
Well, it's interesting because we're a software business. There were a lot of technology companies that came out, and their brand of people first was simply to say, we will not lay anybody off during the pandemic. And then obviously things dragged on, and in different countries, different kind of lockdowns and processes happened, which meant that not everybody who made those promises were able to stick to them. And I didn't do that. And I think that it became a mantra for me when I was doing those calls, and I was doing town hall meetings almost on a weekly basis through COVID, just so that people could have a connection. They weren't able to go to the office anymore. So, I was live streaming and just taking questions from whoever wanted to dial in on that day.
So you weren't hiding from anything.
No,
and
no.
Also, that's outside of what you were doing 6 months prior, 6 weeks prior. So you were pivoting. You were making sure you were moving with what felt right to do.
Yeah, and look, what was interesting is that it was prior to the lockdown in the UK. By and large, not a lot of activity was happening, and companies weren't doing stuff yet. And I got sent a letter by one of my employees. And it was a letter from one of our customers, and it was a CEO letter to the employees about what they were going to do. And I remember sitting there, it was a Friday night, I remember thinking, we're not doing anything. Like we need to get into action. And that night I got my management team on a call. We worked virtually through the weekend, came up with a plan, and on Monday morning we rolled it out. And it was a plan which proved to be extremely successful. But it was importantly, and this was the point I was going to make, it was a plan that wasn't employee first, to be fair. It was a plan that recognized that we had three stakeholders. Those stakeholders were our employees. They were essential for our success. But we also had a load of customers, and we have to be able to provide a service to those customers. Otherwise, those customers would leave, and then I don't need employees. And we obviously have investors. And if I wasn't going to serve those investors, they would find another CEO. So it was a plan that really recognized that those three stakeholders needed to be considered, and we needed to come up with a plan that was going to balance the needs of all three stakeholders. And part of it was explaining that to the employees, which was, look, I'm not going to make you empty promises that I can't fulfill. But here is what I can tell you. What I can tell you is that, and this was the plan we did, if at this point you go into a 4-day week on 80% pay, you're going to have more time to spend with your families because you're not coming into the office anyway at the moment. You're not going to need the money because you're not having to drive into the office. There'll be some cost saving for you. So you take a bit of pain. You have my commitment that we will not lay anyone off, and we gave a specific period which we knew we could get through based on the cost-saving measures that we're taking. But at that point, honestly, we didn't know whether the world was going to end. You know, that's
maybe you dealt with what was in front of you. But the other thing which is so sort of relevant to this is there's all the things you're doing, and again, almost like the Instagram versus reality of the CEO role, like what you put out there and what everyone saw, the late nights, the no sleep, the stress. Relating that to Darren and the CEO that's got to deal with that as an individual, plus be a husband, a father, and time for yourself. How do you manage that? And what do you do to fit in, you know, that important piece, time out, gym, whatever works for you, to make time for that?
So I think the reality is at that point there was no Darren. there was a
so there's peaks and troughs in time in the crisis,
and that's part of it. That's 100% right. And I think I think people assume that being CEO is always a very glamorous thing, and there are times when my job can be great, or my ex-job could be great, but a lot of the time it's extremely demanding, and you know, the idea of flying in business class or first class and staying in nice hotels and so on is great for about a month. But 20 years later, it's not great anymore.
It's a byproduct.
And when you're leaving home on a Sunday and you're saying goodbye to your kids and you're not going to see them for another 2 weeks, that's hard. There's no glamour to that. But I think that you do have to learn to try and find some balance. And you know, the way that I've always thought about it and the way that I've applied it over the 25 odd years that I've been doing this, is that you have to, someone's always talked to me about the 3 or 4 legged chair, and you have to have 3 or 4 legs, because the 2-legged chair is not going to stand. And you've got work, you've got family. The third leg is then for yourself, that it has to be something that you find that you enjoy and that you are passionate about. And then for people who are religious, your religion becomes the 4th leg.
I like that. I've not heard that before.
Yeah. So and so for me, it's always about trying to find something that is mine, that I can spend time with. And you know, I have a couple of hobbies that have, you know. Well,
elaborate, because you've been a CEO for a long time now, chairman. So, and you look like you keep fit, and you've got that sort of twinkle in your eye where you're sort of looking after yourself. But it's amongst all sorts of busy schedules, and even fitting in filming today, right? It's part of a very busy schedule. So do you have a morning routine? Because that's almost like going back to that kind of CEO, founder, entrepreneur. Own the morning, own the day. Does that work for you? And what do you do?
It is, yeah. That's exactly what it is. And it's funny because you and I chatted before about how many CEOs say they wake up at 4 o'clock in the morning and exercise. No. I wake up at 10 to 6. I go sit in the kitchen, have a cup of tea with my wife. 10 to 7, not 10 to 6. 10 to 7, have a cup of tea with my wife, and then we both go to the gym, and we go to separate gyms because she doesn't like me in the gym at the same time as her. And then I go work out, and then, you know, I'm kind of at my desk and showered and everything by 8:30, 9 o'clock.
Yeah.
And that's the routine. And then, you know, my last meeting will be, you know, depending on the day, will be at 8, 9 o'clock. And some days I'm not home, and some days I am, but that's normal.
And actually, a great person to ask this, actually, again, from an award-winning point of view as well, and all the success you've had. What's the difference between a CEO in terms of the role and a chairman?
Yeah, so I think lots of businesses are different. In American businesses, quite often you'll have a chairman and CEO. My wife, for example, is chairman and CEO of the business that she runs. But in Europe, they tend to separate the roles generally. And there's also a distinction between an executive chairman and a chairman. So in my case, I'm executive chairman. And that means that I'm in the business a lot of the time.
You're involved, which would be a natural progression from CEO. I mean,
exactly.
My question, I should have elaborated more, and thank you for clarifying that, is more Darren Roos' version of what's different for you on a day-to-day, week-to-week basis from CEO to exec chairman.
So I could give you the politically correct answer, and the politically correct answer is that everybody in the company reports to Mark, who's the CEO now. And Mark effectively reports to me, and then I'm taking care of things around Mark and helping him to challenge himself and the team. In reality, and my joking answer was going to be that I get to do the things that I want to do, and I don't any longer have to do the things that I don't want to do. I can delegate those to Mark now.
Yeah.
But that is how it works.
But you have the empathy and experience of the fact that you know what that bandwidth is, and you've been there, done that, right?
But it is, I think, there's an important caveat, which is that when you love what you do, there tends to be a correlation between that being value add and not. So if what I loved to do was to, go and have expensive dinners with the employees, there'd be no value add in that, and then the novelty would wear off quickly. What I do love to do is I love to sponsor deals where I'm working with customers, and the satisfaction of closing big transformational deals. And there's a huge amount of value for the company in me doing that. So I can still do that. And it doesn't step on anyone's toes. And I love to do that.
Yeah.
And I'll be able to do that for another 10 years quite comfortably and never step on anyone's toes. But at the same time, given I was CEO for 6 years, I can coach Mark and make sure that when he's dealing with challenges with employees, or he's thinking about where we take the business in the future, or what the budget is for next year, then I can help him think through those things.
Yeah. There's a common theme all the way through this conversation of success. And with maturity and perspective and a certain amount of reflection, sitting here now, how would you define success?
If I may, there's one thing I'd like to say, which is, and I was talking to my sons this week, and my daughter had gone back to boarding school. We'd dropped her, and I was talking to the boys, and I made the point that we talk about success a lot in our family because it is important. But what we probably don't talk about enough is how many times we failed, and whether those are investments that I've made that have failed, or things that we've tried that have failed. I've failed a load of times, and that's okay because it's about bouncing back and the resilience of it. I think that if you never failed, maybe the success wouldn't feel so good anyway, because you wouldn't have a point of reference. It's the amplitude, really, I think, that gives you the satisfaction.
Can you even succeed without failure? Because it's so funny you chose to bring that up without knowing that. But my next kind of question, depending on how you answered your definition of success, was can you achieve success without failure? And almost what's your relationship with it? And you've literally just, you're teaching your kids that. Yeah. How invaluable is that?
Well, I think that when you grow up in a world where everything you see on Instagram, everything you see on TikTok is all about success, or mocking somebody who has failed, which is obviously particularly unhealthy. But when all you see is that, then what you don't see is the intersection of those things. You don't see that the people who have succeeded, every single one of them, without failure, will have failed many times before. But they don't talk about that. Generally, they don't talk about that.
I find it fascinating. In fact, Surinder Arora, who connected us,
yes,
to go through his life story and the hardship and
yes.
The a time away from his family and so on, to then become a billionaire,
Absolutely.
which is, of course, in anyone's world of talking about success, is successful, but that's not what he talks about.
But well, the other thing is not the thing that strikes me about Surinder, and I know this isn't about him, but the thing that strikes me about Surinder is just what a lovely person he is. Yes. A generous, kind, humble person. Not that he's a billionaire. That would come very low on my list of. But
something that would join you. Yeah, absolutely. But you're both super resilient if you need to be, because you've come through so much. And I think that's really the point you're making to your kids, is I can sit here and I can be glowing and we can talk about success, but don't think for 1 second it was a walk in the park.
Well,
easy.
I think it's about the complacency. You in order to be outstanding at anything, you have to be aware of the potential for failure. That is a prerequisite.
Maybe be prepared for it as well.
In the work. Yeah, 100%. Yeah, because you're going to fail. I saw Andy Murray speak last night at an event, and he referenced that Roger Federer had mentioned that throughout his career, and he was the number one player in the world for many, many years, that he only won 54% of his games. And he was talking about Alcaraz's career this year, where he played in many, many tournaments and had only won 4 of them. So, the business world is the same. Life is the same, never mind the business world. Not every relationship that you have is going to work. Not every friendship you have is going to work. Not every job that you do is going to work. You are going to fail many more times than you will succeed. And being able to bounce back from that and be resilient is, it's an extremely important skill, because if you can't master that, you've got a huge problem.
But dare I say, you can only learn it by experiencing it. You cannot learn that in a book. You cannot learn that from a podcast. You've got to get out there and try. And actually, it might be very similar to what you just told your children. But sitting here now, there'll be people potentially listening and watching that are super aspirational, motivated and ambitious to be successful in business. So it's kind of like a question that what advice would you give to a young Darren, a sort of late teens, early 20s, aspiring businessman? What advice would you give them?
Yeah, so I think, developing that resilience and developing a strong work ethic, because the two go together. If you're going to if you're going to work hard, you will give yourself a better chance, right? The more times you get up, the more chance you are of being successful. And I think that hard work and resilience and getting comfortable with the idea of failure is extremely important.
We touched on the physical side of things. I just wanted to end on the mental side of things, because I've read and listened to a number of podcasts and sort of self-development books and business books where it often refers to how many successful CEOs read and consume and are just trying to be the best version of themselves. Does that apply to you? Yeah,
I read a lot, and I tend to read a lot of biographies, and super interested in kind of people's life experiences. The thing is that it is remarkable how many people don't write a true reflection of what happened in their life. It's crazy how kind of rose-tinted those people's lives stories tend to be. I think that we'd all benefit from a bit more authenticity and honesty.
Yeah, and I'd like to finish on you giving back Inner Wings with your wife Melissa. Right? Tell me why you set that up and what the mission is there.
So look, we live in a world where even in 2024, and maybe in the UK it's not as obvious to people, but around the world there is a massive disparity between men and women still, with that's voting rights in some countries, but even in most countries in the world, the disparity on pay and senior women in leadership roles is massive. So as the executive of a business and Melissa as the CEO of her business, we kind of thought about how do we fix this problem. And there's a lot of work happening with young adults and with women in the workplace trying to solve the problem once people are in the workplace or about to hit the workplace. But what we know from the science is that the problem is created when young girls are in their tweens to early teens. And that's when they start to believe that they can only be, and I say this with no offense to teachers and nurses, but they should be a nurse or a teacher, not an astronaut or a doctor. So what Inner Wings does is we go into schools and we run programs teaching young people to find their voice, to build confidence and bravery in young girls, so that they understand that they can be anything they want to be. And hopefully lots of boys and girls go and be teachers and nurses, that we need lots of great teachers and nurses. But what we don't want is people growing up believing that because they're a specific gender, they should have to do something specific. So that's what Inner Wings does.
No, it's brilliant.
It's been great.
I can see from your face, just the way you're talking, all the accolades, all the success and financial kind of reward you've had from countless different things you've done, that fires you up. That's a real, that's fulfillment, that's satisfaction, but also it's you're never going to reach a goal with that. That's a journey. Absolutely. You've got a long way to go, but I hope anyone watching or listening, if they can think of any way of helping you with that.
Innerwings.org.
Yeah. No, Darren, you're absolutely a brilliant person to talk with and learn from. Thank you very much for making time.
Thank you.